Hello, I'm Brandy Brabham. I'm the Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension Agent in Roane County, and I'm here today to talk about basic botany for gardeners. So, what is botany? Basically, it's the scientific study of plants. We're not going to get too sciencey today, but we do need to understand how plants function, the different parts of the plant, and also why they're so vitally important to all of us. So, as you might already know, there are over 3 billion plant species found on Earth, and there is a great graphic that you can find by going to the U.S. Botanical Garden, and it shows all the different plant species and how they're categorized. It's a graphic of like a family tree per se. Some of the things that plants bring us, of course, they are essential for all life. They also serve as a primary food source for humans and animals. They provide us with fuel, Earth's oxygen. They help with erosion control. They help to slow down wind movement. They help us cool the atmosphere. They provide medical compounds, and they're really beautifying our surroundings. So those are the many reasons that we love plants. So today during my talk, I really hope we can talk about, or you come away with a few learning objectives of being able to tell the difference between simple and the different types of plants, whether they're simple or vascular, whether they're gymnosperms or angiosperms, monocots or dicots, annuals, biennials, or perennials. We want to talk a little bit about the basic plant taxonomy, moving on to the principal plant parts, the vegetative parts that include things like the stem, vegetative buds, the leaves, and the roots, and then the reproductive parts that consist of things like the flower buds, the seeds, the fruit, and the flowers themselves, and what their basic functions are. So we're going to talk about also the 3 major plant functions essential for growth and development as well. So the plant kingdom, as I mentioned earlier, is really diverse, and they're divided into different phylums, and most of the plants of those 3 billion plant species that I mentioned consist in the simple plants, and those are not normally found in the landscape. Those are usually like algae, fungi, moss. We're mostly going to focus on vascular plants that have kind of like a straw type system carrying nutrients up and down stems, and they're usually your favorites that you're going to find in your gardens and your landscapes. So vascular plants, they contain water, and they move those nutrients up and down the stems through the xylem and the phylum. Ferns and any other seed-producing plants would fall into this category. Conifers, pines, and junipers kind of have their own category, and then flowering plants, fruits, roses, vegetables, etc., kind of fall into those vascular plants. This diversity is both beneficial and challenging because it helps from preventing widespread disease by being so diverse, but also can be challenging when you're trying to correct a particular area for plants. Maybe you're amending soil or trying to correct an environmental problem. So vascular plants consist of almost all the horticulture plants we talk about. They contain tissue that really transport water and dissolve those nutrients or dissolve materials to help utilize those nutrients. They produce seeds as a way to propagate, or they reproduce themselves. The vascular plants are really divided into 2 classes, the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. Gymnosperms really do not have a true flower. They have seeds that are not enclosed in fruits, and most of the seeds are produced on cones. So think about your conifers, pines, firs, etc. Angiosperms on the other end actually produce flowers. They develop seeds, fruits that contain seeds. And then you have other divisions in those angiosperms, monocots and dicots. So monocots produce 1 seed leaf, so that's the cotyledon leaf, and then the flower parts are generally in multiples of 3, and the leaves are elongated and narrow, and usually they have parallel veins on them. Their vascular systems are arranged in bundles, that xylem and phylum that we mentioned. So think of examples like corn, like field corn or sweet corn, tulips, or the spider plant. Those are monocots. Dicots produce 2 seed leaves, so you're going to have 2 true leaves when they actually start to emerge from the ground or from your seeding medium. They flower generally in multiples of 3 or 5 or 4 or 5 as opposed to 3. They're diversely shaped, have leaves that are, their leaves are diversely shaped, and they have netted veins as opposed to those parallel veins in the monocots. And their vascular systems forms in rings. So think about trees as a really good example of looking at a dicot. So in a stem, you could have like a rose stem is a dicot. Maple trees, cucumbers are also considered dicots. And then in another way to divide plants, you have the way they behave as far as flowering. So you have annuals, biennials, and perennials. So annuals are those types of vascular plants that go through the entire seed germination through seed production in one growing season. Biennial plants are those that start their seed production and vegetative structures and food storage systems in the first year, and then that winter season comes along and creates that cold temperature actually stimulates the production of flowers and fruit for the next season. So it takes 2 years to complete the life cycle of biennials. And then finally you have perennials that live for 3 or more years, and once they mature, they generally produce flowers and seeds every year. There are herbaceous and woody perennials. So herbaceous, when I talk about that, is just those are the ones that have the greenery that kind of die back at the end of each growing season in the winter when it gets cold, and then they regrow in the spring. They green up, and the woody type of perennials they will just have that green sprout of new growth on the tips of the woody tissue as they start to reproduce in the new year. So there's a really good graphic that you can find on the different types of weeds if you want to think about weeds in the context of whether they're an annual or biennial. There's grassy and broadleaf weeds, but they can also be broken down even further from grass type blades or broadleaf type leaves to whether they're an annual, biennial, or perennial. There are there's plant taxonomy, and this is actually helpful in identifying plants. It was developed by Carl von Linné in the 1700s. It's a binomial nomenclature where you give the genus and the species. It's a classification that's based on the flowers and or on the reproductive parts of the plant. So let me give you some examples of the system of the nomenclature. So basics for defining species. A species is anything that is a self-perpetuating population, and it's genetically isolated. So each species is given 2 names. They're usually in botanical Latin, so the scientific name is what it's called. So say sugar maple, for example. It's in the family of acers, so you've got that as the first part, and then the saccharum is the sugar part. And you can even go further down the nomenclature system and get to even the authority or the botanical variety. If it's exhibits different inheritable characteristics naturally, that would be considered a variety. So you might have VAR dot in whatever the variety is after those 2 genus and species types. Whereas a cultivar, you would have, it's usually propagated asexually. It doesn't need the reproductive processes of a variety, and those would be hybridized or something. and you would see VAR period and then the name of the cultivar listed behind the species in the genus. Let's move on to the principal parts of a plant, because it's very important to understand how plants are put together to be able to grow them successfully, to troubleshoot, come up with the reasons why they're not performing at their best. So we have the vegetative and the reproductive types. So the vegetative parts of the plant are considered those stems, the buds, leaves, and the roots. The reproductive parts, of course, again, are those flower buds, the fruits, the flowers themselves, and the seeds. So we'll start with parts of the stem, because it's important to understand how the stem is put together and how it functions. Now, I won't go into a deep detail on each part of the plant, but I will in some areas. So we've got nodes that are on the stem and internodes. So nodes are the enlarged rings of the stem where you would see attachments of the buds or the leaves will sprout out. The internodes are that region between one node and the next node. It's kind of like their growing region. So internodes lengths can vary for several reasons, and this is something as a gardener you would want to know and be able to kind of diagnose some plant issues. If the internode of your, say, your vegetable plant, your fruit, whatever you're growing, is it can be decreased by decreasing your fertility. So if you have not very good fertility in your soils, you might not see a very elongated internode. Low light levels can cause the plant to stretch. If you've ever tried to grow seedlings, you can see that occurring in the very young plants. Internode lengths can decrease when growing seasons draws to an end. So as the plant starts to store up those resources in the base, it starts to conserve that energy and put it in different parts of the plant as opposed to the growing, so toward the end of the growing season. And then plants that are growing rapidly tend to have greater internode lengths than less vigorous plants. So if you see a plant that has those really long internodes, you know that it's happy, it's healthy, it's doing well. Internode lengths can also vary based on the competition of surrounding foliage, like if it's getting shaded or if there's fruit developing. So just a thing to think about as you're gardening. Growth habits. Stems really help to define or describe a plant's growth habit or the growth between different types of plants. So for an example, if you were trying to identify what this plant was that you found in your garden or you found in your yard as you bought a new piece of property, if it's going to be, we'll use trees and shrubs as an example. So trees, we know that it is anything over 12 inches in height, and it usually has one lateral stem or one main branch, and a shrub is going to be less than 12 feet and have usually one main stem, but it can also have varying stems. So stems are conduits, basically. We mentioned this earlier as we talked about vascular system plants. So vascular systems are composed of two types of tissue, the xylem and the phloem. So the xylem really conducts the water and the minerals upward, and the phloem conducts or takes the starches, the carbohydrates, and sugars manufactured for the plant to where it needs to go all throughout the plant. In older dicot systems, so think trees for example, there's a vascular cambium layer. You've heard of that cambium layer where it's between the xylem and the phloem, and this is the site where cell division and active growth really occurs and is responsible for the stem's increased growth and girth. And that pith is just the center of, like, so for a woody ornamental, that would be what turns hard and turns into wood, where the growing tissue keeps getting larger and then eventually hardening out and getting bigger. So in monocots, the xylem and the phloem are arranged in bundles. So they'll be like sporadically scattered throughout the stem, whereas in dicots, they're formed in a circle. Dicots and also angiosperms, think your pine trees. So in those, you've got the xylem on the inside, if I get this right, and the phylum on the outside. And these are really important to understand what varieties or what types of plants that you have to be able to cultivate them successfully. So there's some diversified stem systems. I'm not going to go into a lot of details over those, but I am going to mention them. There are above ground stems and below ground stems. We have crowns, stolons, and spurs that are considered stems that are above the ground and a little bit different looking than a straight up stem from a grass plant or a vegetable you might see. And then what we consider below ground stems are in bulbs, corms, rhizomes, and tubers. So, and when you think of crowns, they're really compressed stems that just stay at the base. They have shortened internodes. Think strawberries, dandelions, or African violets. Those all have crowns. Stolons are really horizontal stems that lie across the ground. So again, strawberries can have stolons. Spider plants is a good example of stolons. Spurs are really short, stubby side stems, and they arise from the main stem. So think about how a tree develops. Common examples of spurs would be like apple trees, pear trees, cherry trees, where they bear fruit. When we move to the below ground stems, we talk about bulbs examples. Those are really like compressed underground stems that are surrounded by fleshy leaves and develop a center bud at the tip of the stem, and those are tulips, lilies, daffodils, and onions. Corms are solid stems whose scales have been reduced to a dry, leafy-like covering. Examples are gladiolas and crocuses. Rhizomes are stems that grow horizontally just below the surface. So think of like quackgrass or irises are another example of rhizomes. Tubers we all know pretty well. White potatoes is a great example of that. Those little eyes are actual nodes on the stem. So the potato's a stem too. And then we have the modified roots or the tuberous roots. Think about sweet potatoes, and these are where the underground organs and nodes and internodes are actually, they are just tubers that are true roots that develop into the plant itself. So I will just make mention that plant propagation, we're not going to go into that in our discussion today, but it can be successfully accomplished by dividing those above ground stems or sectioning them off as you would have a node on one of those sections that have the internodes. And that helps you reproduce and make other copies or additional plants. The same with the underground stems that I mentioned. Moving on to leaves. In the botany world, leaves' primary function is to photosynthesize, to capture that energy from the sun and to convert that sugar for later use for the plant. So leaves are green because of chloroform, taking it way back to science class. That green pigment that you see, and it involves photosynthesis. Leaves are broad so they can capture the maximum amount of sunlight. There are different types of venation, vein patterns. Leaves are really a means of identifying plants. You can have simple or compound leaves, and I don't have any great show and tell for those, but you can look those up in many botany charts and things, so you can see the different simple versus compound leaf structures. You can also identify those plants based on the shapes of the leaf blades, and there's many different types of blade shapes, as well as the shape of the blade ends. So there's different ends on the different leaves. So, and then two more that you can help identify your plants. We have leaf margins. Some are smooth, some are serrated, and you can identify plants based on the leaf margins. And lastly, the types of leaf arrangements, whether they're alternate or on the opposite side of the stem, or whether they're whorled, things like that. So plant growth and development. So there are three main essential functions essential for growth and development. That photosynthesis that I mentioned means that we're bringing the light together. That's the building up process. Then you have respiration, which is the process by which the actual sugars and starches are oxidized and releasing energy. So that's the breaking down of the breaking down process. And then there's the transpiration that occurs in the plant. And this is the process where the plant loses water primarily through leaf stomats, and that happens because of temperature, humidity, or wind. And transpiration is really a necessary process by which like 90% of the water that enters through the plant's roots get pulled up into the plant. The minerals are transported to where they need to go, or the nutrients, and it helps to cool the plant down through that evaporation process, and it also helps to translocate the nutrients and the turgor pressure. And that, the best way I can describe that without going into a lot of detail, see the wilting of the plants. Maybe they got too much sun and not enough water, and it just kind of helps them stay firm. We're going to move on to the bud of the plant. There are different types of buds. There are terminal buds, which determine the overall height or size of the plant, and there are lateral, or also known as auxiliary buds. Those are the ones that grow out by the sides. There are leaf buds that are usually on lateral, or there are also flowering buds. So leaf and flowering buds can both be on the sides of the stems, and of course one is for vegetative purposes and one is for fruit production or flower production. And then there's even advantageous buds, which is basically when taking advantage of an environmental condition, a bud might develop. So those are the different types of buds that you might see on a plant. Moving on the vascular plants, moving on to the roots of a plant. They're the below ground portion of a plant. Now, they serve very important functions. There are principal functions for roots that involve not only the absorption of the nutrients in the water from the soil that they're in, but they also serve as an anchor to keep the plant stabilized. And when the wind blows, they really furnish a physical support system for that stem, which is vitally important. They serve as food storage organs for that plant when it needs to take it up. And they can also be used to propagate, which is to produce other plants. There are two main types of roots. There are the tap roots, which go straight down and they're really long and they go deeper. And then there are fibrous roots that spread out. They're like hair-like roots. And different plants will have different types. And that's also another way of plant identification, knowing what type of root you have, knowing what type of stem, the buds. It all goes into the leaf arrangement, the leaf shape, the leaf edges. All these help you to identify what type of plant you're dealing with. Moving on to flowers in a plant, the structure of the flower basically comes down to the male and the female parts, and then you have the sepal, the receptacle, and the petals. So the female parts consist of the ovary, the style, and the stigma. The male parts of the stamen has the anthers and the filaments in it. So when you think of flowers and you look around your landscape or your garden centers, you look for different types of flowers. So the different types of flowers, there can be incomplete, perfect, imperfect, pistillate, and stagmate, which pistillate is is a female flower, and stagnate is a male flower. They have they have functional either female parts or functional male parts, but not the opposite. So incomplete flowers just lack one of all the parts that I mentioned. Perfect flowers have both a functional pistils and stamens, and imperfect flowers lack either the pistil or the stamen. So those are all types of flowers that you'll see, especially you'll see like flowering plants like impatiens or begonias that have those differing flower structures. In addition to the flower having those main components, there are also monoecious and dioecious flowers. And the monoecious flowers are where the actual male and female parts of the flower occur in the same part in the plant. So think about corn, for example, or pecans, cucumbers, squash. Male flowers are followed by female flowers. You have both on that plant, in that flower. The dioecious flower has a female part flower in one part of a plant, and it might have a male flower in another part, so be separate. Like hollies are an example of that, male and female flower. And this is really important to mention because a lot of times you will need, like, I'm thinking like for fruit trees, you will need those male and female predominant flowering flowers to cross-pollinate or improve your pollination success. So pollination is a very important process where pollen actually transfers from the anthers to the stigma where reproduction can happen. So it's very important that we don't try to overburden our landscapes or our gardens with insecticides or pesticides of any kind, because that can endanger the pollinators, which are the insects. There's 93% of insects are considered beneficial. There's only a small percentage of insects that are actually harmful. Then you also have birds that help pollinate. Rain is another thing that helps pollinate, and wind itself is. Think about how you plant field corn or sweet corn. You have to plant it in blocks, so that wind pollination really helps make your corn kernels filled up, so are full and very well pollinated. So the next part of the plant is the fruit itself, and the fruit is actually the enlarged ovary that is part of that flower structure that I was talking about, and that ovary kind of goes around the newly developed seeds. So simple fruits develop from a single ovary. So think of things like the pone fruits and the berries, some berries and nuts and legumes. Aggregate fruits develop from a single flower that has many ovaries. Think of strawberries, blackberries, raspberries, those little tiny blisters all have that several ovaries on the fruit itself in the flower. And then multiple fruit can develop from tighter clusters of separate independent flowers born on a single structure. So these examples of this would be like if you've ever planted beet seeds, pineapple, we really don't have much of that in West Virginia, or fig trees. I know we have some figs, but if you open up a fig and you see all those different structures, those are formed from separate clusters of flowers. So beet seeds is another example. They are actually, if you hold the beet seeds in your hands, the cluster of seeds are several dried fruits that are stuck together. So several seedlings can grow from each of those fruit or seeds that you would toss into the garden. So the last part of the plant that I'm going to talk about today is the seed. Seeds really contain three main components. You have the embryo, the endospurm, and the seed coat. So the embryo, of course, is a miniature plant that is in a in a state of arrested development, basically. It's just in there ready to come out. The angiosperm is the built-in food supply that has the proteins, the carbohydrates, and all the fats that plant is going to need to survive. And then you have the seed coat, which is really a hard outer coating, which protects the seeds from diseases and insects and prevents the water from entering the seed. A lot of times you're going to need things like the freeze and thaw cycle to cause that seed coat to crack open, or some water to cause it to spread open, or in some cases it has to be scraped up against something, like a lot of times ingestion by birds or small rodents help to stratify that seed coating to make sure that germination will occur. So those are the different components of a plant. That's the quick and dirty rundown of basic botany for gardeners. There is a book out there that's been out for many, many years if you want to get to know botany a little bit better. It goes more in depth. There are different charts and websites available to learn the different leaf arrangements, leaf shapes, and things that I mentioned in my discussion. I just want to remind everyone who's out there watching today that we are going to have a brief survey at the end of this sent to you, and you need to be sure to answer the questions that we pose and enter the code that I'm going to provide you, and that code is SEED. So be sure to get your points for the Grow This Throwdown Academy that we're having, and make sure that you answer the survey question. And we really appreciate your time and listening to our academy today. I'll entertain any questions if you have those available at this time.
We got a lot of people who are very said this is great information. They've really enjoyed it, but I haven't seen any questions.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. You all have a great day and happy gardening.